All right, thank you so much for that. Let's go to the next one. I see that Vijay is already on his way. So Dr. Vijay Kumar, please welcome to the stage. You will get a nice warm welcome from everyone, I promise you. There we go. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, let me see if I got this correct. You have been working with technology-enabled education innovations for a long time, 20-something years, right?
30-something years.
At MIT.
I only look young, 30-something.
You only look young, yeah. That's because we did makeup out there. Okay. And also strategy planning, implementing technological innovations as well for advancing future education, part of your work as well. Right. Have I missed anything? Do you play an instrument? We have had a lot of music.
No, I sing.
You sing? Okay, then we have two singers here. We can talk about that in the yeah, there we are. And we take that in the cocktail afterwards, right? All right, you take over.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Honorable Minister, distinguished participants, leaders. I am just delighted to be here in Latvia and at this important gathering. And I say important because it really represents the launch of, of a very important transformational journey. And I have to tell you that we feel privileged, we at the Jameel World Education Lab at MIT, feel privileged to be part of that journey, to be a fellow traveler, a fellow co-constructor, the word that was used. I also wanted to say welcome, fellow futurists. Now, there's been a lot of talk. My background is as a futurist. My PhD program, actually, it was wonderful to hear Gert talk about Bucky Fuller, because he was one of the advisors of the program that I did my PhD in future studies. But I look at all of us as fellow futurists who are actually putting our heads together to co-construct a preferred future. And there's been a lot of discussion, and there'll be more about what does that preferred future look like? What could it look like? What can we make it to be? But there was a sign on the door of our graduate program which said a futurist is not one who predicts the future, but one who makes future possibilities more real for others. So as planners, as educators, as designers, as government officials, as teachers, that is what we do. We make future possibilities more real for our, our fellows and our future generations. And this is sort of what we do at the Jameel World Education Lab. We try to work with our collaborators to co-construct preferred futures for their context. And how do we do it? What we try to do is we know what we know what has worked for us, so we try to bring our assets, our learnings into play. We bring our innovation, pedagogical innovation, research, practice, we fund research, and we bring that, and then we convene our collaborators to work with them to identify what their priorities might be and how we might create transformational programs, do development for them that suits the agenda that they have. So that's what we do. But when I say that we draw upon what MIT has, there are two dimensions to it. One is what we call the invariance of quality education. There are some things that we hold dear. We talk about active learning, problem-based learning, mens et manus, mind and hand, mind and hand and heart. These are invariants and they're reflected in our programs. We bring that into play. But we also bring innovation. We're constantly trying to say, are there things that we leverage, not necessarily through technology alone, innovative practices. So a combination of invariance and innovation is what we bring into play in terms of co-designing, co-constructing. And what we do with our collaborators is help articulate the future and set the stage for implementing it in their context. So that's what we do. It's reflected through some of the programs. Now, why do we do it? And you heard a lot about why we do it. It was articulated very well, by our morning speakers, by Gert and by Pedro. And, some of it has to do a lot with, and this is, I'm preaching to the choir over here, has to do a lot with how the labor market is changing, economies are changing, and a lot of it is driven by the centrality of digital in our life, in the economy, in the world. You know, when you look at these things, you recognize this. In fact, one of the things I wanted to point to was the earbud over there, which is the ear audio equivalent of what Gerd was showing as the glasses. Those are translating earbuds. So we see all that. But a statement that a colleague of mine, Michael Saylor, actually, who does a lot of work with open education, he said that really struck home with me was he said one day we were talking and he said, Vijay, when we studied geography, we looked at an atlas, it had maps. That became 1 million images on Google Earth, and now it is an intelligent service on my watch. So every product is moving from a hard product to an intelligent soft service. Think about the implications of that in terms of what we learn, how we learn, what we teach, where we teach. So that sort of sums up, in some sense, the influence that technology, digital centrality is happening on jobs and skills, and it in a pretty impactful way. But when I talk about the skills that we need, the changing economy and the labor market needs, it's not all reactive in the sense that, oh my God, this is happening, we have to make sure that to some extent that's true, but in many cases, we are employing technology because it brings certain things that we have not been able to do well. It is to do some things that we do well better, but in many cases to do things that we were not able to do. I point to the example that you have on the right, the augmented reality program from the Newport. It is in the book of one of my colleagues, George Westerman, who's also at the Jameel World Education Lab, who does a lot of work with the future of jobs. And the Newport shipbuilding yard, it talks about how they have started using virtual reality, goggles, etc., to provide their welders and work people. What was happening is that these people would come in, they're screwing a bolt or they're welding and their plates, and they never had any notion of what would happen if they made a mistake, what the downstream implications of what was happening, the damage, the failure rates was. They also did not know what they were doing. They thought the job was coming and building, just screwing this plate onto another plate. What happened once they put these virtual reality glasses on, they could see the downstream effects if they screwed something wrong, if they welded something wrong, all the damage it was creating, how the failure rates. And so the failure rates decreased dramatically. What was more important was they suddenly realized that what they were building was a big ship, which could be an aircraft carrier, which could be a thing, and suddenly the morale shot up. So the morale increased, the efficiency increased, the failure rates decreased. So in many cases, we are looking at the application of technology in these jobs and skills, not just as reactive to something that's happening despite us, but utilizing it proactively. And this is something that we think about when we think about what are the new knowledge, new skills that we need to create. So I wanted to say that now, sometimes as this morning speakers are also pointing out, all this seems so daunting. Let me go back to one more thing over here. I talk about new competencies, new skills. There is another very, very dominant force when we think about, about the world, which is the new non-traditional learner. Now, our tendency when we talk about these non-traditional learners is to typically talk about the millennials, the younger generation. But I'm not just talking about them. They're certainly a big factor. But it's also those people who are displaced either locationally or vocationally, people who are in jobs needing upskilling, people who cannot migrate. We do a very important program with the refugees, right, who have to learn either because of, who have to leave, who are being displaced, and you're seeing a lot of that right now, very close to here, whether it was a social political crisis like, when we started working with the Syrian crisis. But people are being displaced because of that, because of labor markets moving, and so we have to think about how do we provide continuous learning opportunities to these new non-traditional learners who might be vocationally displaced, who might be locked up in jobs. So new skills, new learners, and new non-traditional learners. How do we make sure there's a continuous supply of different kinds of learning? There is another fact over here. This came up in an earlier conversation we were having. Generally, our education, we were delivering with sort of almost like a lowest common denominator model, one shoe fits all model, and suddenly we are realizing, which we knew, but we didn't know how to attend in any in an effective way, that learners come with different aspirations, different motivations, with different needs. And so the notion of scale, sometimes I tell my colleagues that scale is not a scalar, it is a vector. So it is not just a matter of taking something and doing the same thing for millions of people, but doing many things for many kinds of people. The numbers have to explain. So all this is the demand side of the equation that we are trying to construct a future for. It looks daunting, and this is where I switch on to sometimes sounding like a television spokesperson. I say, don't worry, on the supply side, we've got some good forces going. And I point to these three things: digital learning innovation, I point to learning sciences, I point to the open movement, and those are the three important things. A new factor that's coming up, which is really about the new ecosystem. Suddenly we don't have to do it alone. And it's reflected in this room, in the conversations. We're suddenly talking about institutions collaborating with other institutions, institutions collaborating with industry. We are looking at cross-sector. So the ecosystem has many players that can be leveraged in order to meet that daunting demand. Digital learning. Now, there's a lot of stuff around, is it educational technology, is it distance learning? And I said, no, we have to think about this generously. If you look at the learning cycle, everything from lectures to credentials is prone to innovation through technology. Lectures are 6-minute video segments. We have frequent formative analytics, data testing that goes on. We have advanced virtuality. We have augmented reality, where we look at even studying things like biases that teachers might have when they go into. So this whole spectrum of things, and there's, of course, data that we can leverage in different kinds of ways. So digital learning innovation comes in a variety of forms to improve what we do, to create new kinds of affordances. Integrated science of learning. So one of the things that I like to point out, that digital learning is not just the employment of technology, it is actually the implementation of what we learn about learning from learning science. There's brain science, cognitive science. I like to point to these examples. Some things that we don't readily know, for instance, we all know about learning curves. Do we all know that there are forgetting curves? That when you think about, if you look at that, for instance, over there, when learning is interspersed, spaced learning with frequent feedback, recall is much better after a period of time, and which is the kind of stuff that we want, because the slope of the forgetting curve becomes much more gentle. So when we try to think about digital on-site combined with online, we have these different affordances that we mix and match in order to get to better learning, better mastery, better recall. So what digital really allows us to do is to implement what we know about learning science. It's not just taking what we have been doing all the time and planting it online or bringing some technology on the side. It is really re-engineering, rethinking our courses. In fact, this is the kind of stuff, and then preparing our faculty, our teachers, to say, how can we meaningfully bring ourselves into this new realm of new redesigned courses so that we can deliver. So we actually have started something called the Integrated Teaching Learning Initiative, which does these kinds of studies in order to see how we might actually improve learning and improve quality at scale. So with all this, what does the new landscape look like? I've just identified a whole bunch of initiatives that we have launched at MIT, which illuminate the possibilities. You saw some in the morning from our morning presenters when Gert was showing. There are things, I want to say sometimes, this is not the future for 2050, this is the future today. These are the things that we're doing, which set the stage from here to 250. We talk about AR and VR, I've already talked about. We talk about blockchain technology, where credentials, students carry their credentials regardless of where they are. They are not dependent on a central authority or central registrar. You use technology to distribute credentials. We talk about playful assessments. You design games for teaching. We can't use the same old assessment techniques that we have. You do game-based assessments, innovative ways in which assessment can be done. We look at AI for saying, can we create different pathways for different kinds of learners? The Micromasters program is something that I like to talk about, which reflects these principles that I have been describing so far. What is the Micromasters program? So we say that, look, there are 5 courses. A Micromasters is a 5-set course, and it's in all these subject areas that you see. Anyone in the world can take these courses online. They complete it, they can get online credentials, right? Now, if you want a degree from a particular institution, and you can qualify, you do the tests, and then you can spend a semester in that, whether it's at MIT for an MIT degree, if that exists, let's say, in developmental economics or in the University of Cairo. So suddenly what you're saying is, look, you do not have to get admitted in order to get learning. You can learn, you can get an online credential, and what we're seeing is that the marketplace is voting with its feet. People are actually recruiting these folks to do these MicroMasters. But if you want a particular kind of degree, then you can go to an institution and do a semester. What it's doing is it reduces the cost, the time for getting that kind of credential by 1/3, by 1/4. So what you're really saying, but the real innovative part of this is you're disaggregating, you're separating out the relationship between going to an institution, getting a degree, between learning and getting a degree, and then saying, look, there are different kinds of degrees, credentials that you can get for different kinds of purposes that you want. So this reflects the kind of innovative possibilities that comes from online, combining, doing judicious combinations of on-site and online. Advanced virtuality, I already talked about. We're doing a lot of studies, for instance, looking how can teachers who might be going into a classroom go through, learn about bias, learn about cognitive difficulties, math difficulties, before they actually go to the classroom and encounter students with those kinds of difficulties. How might we impose, and many of you have seen these kinds of applications, how might we impose virtual on the physical to get a deeper understanding of whether it's about the human body, whether it's about a historical piece of architecture. The AI part, now this is actually one of our J-WEL members, Gyan. They created, so we are working with them to see how might we look, let's say I look at the LinkedIn profile of a person or a resume of a person, how might I use AI to parse out what are the competencies and skills that they have? On the other side, we have vast repositories. We have OpenCourseWare with 2,500 courses. How might I harvest that to see what are the competencies that are, concepts that are embedded there so that I can map the skills that a person, and then you look at jobs. Monster has jobs. There are various companies like Burning Glass who look at jobs and say, here are the component skills that are needed. How might I use AI to get the component skills that a person has, map it to the skills that are needed by the job, and then create pathways through harvesting this content so we can find different pathways for different people who come into the learning space with different kinds of preparation. So the possibilities of providing this kind of differentiated learning are just enormous. So I use the word disruptive. I was struck this morning when Gerd talked about exponential, and I was thinking discontinuous because the change that we see is really discontinuous, it is exponential. But when I think, there is another term I want to introduce over here, which is really disruption. What is this disruptive innovation that we are looking to do through digital technology, through learning science, through open education? It is to really say that many of the structural assumptions that we have taken for granted are challengeable. When we did, I'm a very big open education person. What we saw was the relationship between access, cost, and quality is not an immutable triangle. You can have great access without sacrificing quality. You can have great quality without proportionate increase in cost. What does the MicroMasters show? It shows that you can get learning without having to join an institution. You can get different kinds of degrees, you have micro-credentials. So many of these structural existing relationships are disrupted, and that gives us different kinds of possibilities to render quality education, to meet those kinds of very daunting demands that, that we all have been talking about. So what does this new landscape look like? It's certainly modular. It provides a lot of agility for us to regroup, reshape ourselves to respond to different kinds of need. It provides continuity. You don't have to be stuck within jobs. You don't have to be stuck. It provides, the standard term that we use is lifelong learning. It provides differentiated education. It really challenges current structural assumptions. I like to say that we design for abundance, we design for difference. So, and a lot of people talked about it, therefore, what are the kinds of competencies? So, and this comes up in all our work, because when you look at all this, it's not really about digital skills and digital competencies. It is about enduring skills. There was a lot of reference made to human skills, the metacognitive skills that transcend different domains, because the only thing, and this is a very well hackneyed term, the only thing that is constant is change. And you say, how can what are the kinds of competencies that will allow our learners to transcend changes which they will either respond to, or even better, that they will create themselves for the future. So this is sort of what we do. I'm really hoping that through the work that we are launching, working with Latvia, working with Riga Business School, with RTU, and subsequently as a model elsewhere, that we'll be able to bring about these kinds of learning, these kinds of changing. Because to really look at disruptive innovative possibilities for transforming education in this country and keep it as a model for the rest of the world, that's what we want to do, change the world of learning and change the world through good learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.